All right, good evening. Let's get started. This is the City Council meeting, 6 p.m. Tuesday, April 26th. I'd like to acknowledge that the press and public obviously have been made aware of this meeting and were duly notified in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. Feel free to join me for our invocation, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Father, we thank you for the beauty of the day. We thank you for the beautiful piece of paradise we get to live and work and play in, and ask that you'll help us to be good stewards of what we carry on here tonight as the city's business, and do it in kindness and do it with the greater good in mind. In your name I pray. Amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Nicole, roll call.
Councilmember Anderson.
Present.
Councilmember Bogosian.
Here.
Councilmember Hahn.
Here.
Councilmember Myers.
Here.
Councilmember Pierce.
Here.
Councilmember Popson.
Here.
Councilmember Streetman.
Here.
Councilmember Ward.
Here.
Mayor Pounds.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. First item is swearing in of our new employee. We've been waiting on this day for quite some time. Chief Oliveris, if you'll come to the front with whatever part of this crowd you would like to bring with you. We know we've got people from Mount Pleasant, IOP, family, all over the place. So, Nicole.
Solemnly swear that I am duly qualified according to the ordinances of the city of Isle of Palms to perform the duties of the position to which I have been selected, and that I will, to the best of my ability, discharge the duties thereof. So help me God.
So help me God.
Chief.
Chairman,
Chief. Sign that and give that to Janice.
Go ahead, Jimmy.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, I'd like to make a motion to suspend the rules of order to entertain item 10G.
Second.
Councilmember Anderson.
Aye.
Councilmember Bogosian.
Aye.
Councilmember Hahn.
Aye.
Councilmember Myers.
Aye.
Councilmember Pierce.
Aye.
Councilmember Popson.
Aye.
Councilmember Streetman.
Aye.
Councilmember Ward.
Aye.
Mayor Pounds.
Aye.
All in favor?
Thank you. So item 10G is Proclamation 2022-04 to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Windjammer. So Bobby, Malcolm, whoever y'all would like to bring up here with you, we got a little proclamation we'd love to. Got a real quick proclamation that we'll read. This again is Proclamation 2022-04, celebrating the Windjammer's 50th anniversary. Whereas Malcolm and James Burgess opened the Windjammer on Front Beach of Isle of Palms, South Carolina, 50 years ago in 1972, at the site of establishment formerly known as the Surf Deck that dated back to the 1940s. Whereas Bobby Ross made his way to the Windjammer in 1980 as a summer bartender before becoming manager in 1982 and then co-owner in 2006. Whereas the original Windjammer building was a ground level bar with a sand floor and well-used pinball machine and beach volleyball courts out back. Whereas the locals Beach Bar closed just before Hurricane Hugo destroyed much of Isle of Palms on September 21st, 1989, and reopened on June 21st, 1990. Whereas residents and visitors of the Isle of Palms celebrated the return toward normalcy by attending opening night in great numbers. Whereas Malcolm Burgess has given back to the Isle of Palms community through public service, including serving a term as mayor and several terms on the Accommodations Tax Advisory Committee. Whereas the Windjammer has built a reputation as a major music and performing arts venue for the entire Low Country, where stars such as Hootie and the Blowfish are born and drawing new and returning visitors to the Isle of Palms. Whereas the Windjammer is a South Carolina icon that brings people together, from eclectic to island folks, to families and fun seekers, athletes, music lovers, old and young, to experience the Jammer experience. So therefore, be it proclaimed on this day, April 26, 2022, that the mayor and city council of the Isle of Palms, on behalf of the city, do thank the Windjammer for being a hallmark for the Isle of Palms, helping create memories for years to come, and creating a place where island families and visitors can experience our community's history and culture. Congratulations.
None of this would be possible if it wasn't for Malcolm. Thank you, Malcolm. What we're going to do now is we're going to go to the Windjammer, Swig and Swan, it's catering. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, 9 o'clock, we got shots with the mayor. We don't have it. We have no coffee. Thank you.
I saw that on the agenda.
I'll show you around. That's it. I was down there 36 of them.
Not that old. Having a good time.
I'll tell you the story. Yeah.
Well, if it's at 9 o'clock, let's not miss this point.
Mr. Mayor, can I move, we adjourn and go to the Windjammer?
You can make up.
All right, all you Windjammer fans and Oliveris family, you're welcome for changing the agenda. So Jimmy, when you change the order, I got all out of whack. We need a vote on the proclamation, please.
Need a motion to approve.
Motion to approve and a second. Second.
No, okay.
Nicole?
Councilmember Anderson. Aye. Councilmember Bogosian.
Aye.
Councilmember Han.
Aye.
Councilmember Myers.
Aye.
Councilmember Pierce.
Aye.
Councilmember Popson.
Aye.
Councilmember Streetman.
Aye.
Councilmember Ward.
Aye.
Mayor Pounds.
Aye.
All in favor.
Thank you. Nicole, does that take care of that item?
Yes, sir.
Next item is item 3, citizens' comments. We have a special presentation by Coastal Science and Engineering, Stephen Trainum, and guests. Come join us. Thanks for coming tonight.
positioned offshore. So if that tan area is your beach, starting in 2011, there was one about 2,000 feet from the beach. And then every year it moves maybe 500 to 1,000 feet closer to the beach and also increases in elevation. So these are the kind of things that we're tracking to see how much sand is coming on and where we think it's going to attach and things like that. Next slide. Yep, next one. As a little bit of background, your beach condition hasn't always been healthy down coast. This is an image from 1984 in the top. There are actually seawalls and old groins that are currently buried under the dunes in that area. If you look even further back in 1949, that shows you at the east end of the island where Wild Dunes is now, there was actually a huge shoal attachment that built out almost a whole new little small barrier island for almost a decade. That migrated onshore over time. But that's a very large scale event where some of the ones we've seen recently are a little smaller scale. Next slide. So a little bit history on the project. Again, we came in around 2007. The only real other kind of semi-large scale projects in 1983, as they were dredging out the marina, some of that sand was moved over to the beach. There has been episodic kind of sand transfers or scraping efforts from the 80s and 90s to deal with some of the short-term erosion with these shoals. But in 2008, we added 900,000 cubic yards of sand to the beach via offshore. We did two pretty good sand scraping projects in 2012 and 2014, just moving sand from accretional areas to those erosion areas to try to buy time as these shoals are moving around. And then in 2018, we had our next large scale project that moved about 1.6 million cubic yards. Next slide. We do have some erosion hotspots that over the past 15 years have kind of been the problem areas, and they do tend to shift around, and then sometimes they'll heal naturally, sometimes they won't. Those tend to be the areas where the development's furthest to the ocean. That's the Seascape Ocean Club area and Wild Dunes. And then lately it's been the Beechwood East, Dunecrest Lane area that's been the erosion hotspots, and that's continued since the last project, especially in that Beechwood area. And next slide. This is the 2018 project. It's kind of a brief summary. We did pump sand from offshore using this bar area E. It spanned about 14 or almost 2 miles of beach, not quite 2 miles of beach, and it was 1.6 million cubic yards. And it was about $13.5 million. And that was a joint effort between the city, state funds, FEMA funds, and funds from Wild Dunes. Next slide. And just some after photos. We really built a very wide beach. In some areas it was over 500 feet wide, because we know that despite the average erosion rates, you can have very rapid, significant erosion where you may lose 150 or 200 feet within a 12-month period. So we're trying to give enough buffer to allow these shoal manipulations or variations in the shoal erosion to be able to be withstood by the beach. So that was the goal. Next slide. So we monitor the beach every year. We break it down into 7 different reaches just to kind of simplify the volume changes, so we can kind of identify different areas on the island. Reach 1 is at the Breach Inlet side, moving around to Reach 7 at the Dewey's Inlet shoreline. Next slide. We had a significant amount of erosion again this past year. It kind of matched the previous year. Most of that erosion was occurring at the east end of the island. We saw gains at the west end. So again, all these details are going to be in the report. I'm not going to get down into the weeds of that unless you have specific questions. Again, the hot spots tend to be around the beach club villas and just west of there in Wild Dunes. Now, one thing we did notice is immediately after the project, we saw very dynamic changes. So we had a lot of, we might have lost 100 cubic yards per foot in one area and gained 100 cubic yards per foot in another area. We're seeing those magnitudes decrease, but it's becoming kind of more consistent and widespread. So it's not as variable, but it's still eroding at a fairly similar rate. Next slide. To kind of show you where we're at just on the east end, this is again the Wild Dunes kind of area. We lost about 321,000 yards last year, which is 20 cubic yards per foot. That's a pretty significant erosion rate. I'd like to see that somewhere closer to 5 or so. Since the project, we've lost about 61% of the fill in that area. So we're almost, well, that was last year's 2021's numbers, so that's 3 years. Some of that number is volume loss that's occurring underwater. So the beach width is performing a little better than the volume width, because sometimes with the shoals, it doesn't match 1-to-1. But we still have about 620,000 yards. Again, the 2008 project was 900,000 yards. So we're, large scale volumes here still remain, but it's a lot more erosion than we would have liked to see. Next slide. This is the animation that we've developed from our monitoring efforts, and it's showing you a loop of how the sand is shifting. So this really highlights how the delta and the inlet is affecting your beach condition. What you see in the brighter yellow colors, that's the shallower parts, so that's your shoals. And it'll loop a couple of times, but this is almost a 15-year record now. And you see these shoals moving from the seaward side of the delta, and they'll attach to the beach. And you'll notice the channel is shifting from kind of along the beach, and it'll flip up. And we call that a channel avulsion. So when that channel flips from being oriented to the south, it'll break through the delta and open up a new channel. And what that does is it releases all the sand that's between that used to be on the seaward side. Now it's on the landward side of the channel. That's what moves to the beach over time. So we've tracked 2 of those large scale channel avulsions since 2007. And after that event, it usually takes 4 or 5 years for that sand to make its way up to the beach. And it's during that probably 3 to 5 years after that process is when you get the most beach change as that shoal gets close to the beach. That's really where it starts to do a lot of the impact on the beach condition. So that's there, and I can point out a lot of different things in that. It's also going on with development of shoals on the corner of the island that's actually helped the east end of Wild Dunes. So around the Ocean Club area has been a lot healthier the past 10 years than it was after the first project because of that development. So a lot of the sand that has been placed on the beach, some of that has recycled itself into the inlet system. So while it's not on your beach, it's still going to be there to add to your beach at a future date. Next slide. Just a couple of things to point out. Looking over the past 2 years, where you can see where the channel shifted. It was coming out to the south, and then it's coming out to the north up there. So all this sand that was here, kind of separated from the island, is now moving up and coming to the island. The other thing we're seeing is this feature. It's a little hard to see at a scale and from a distance, but that's a large chunk of sand that's actually kind of merged onto the beach as well. That was sand that had moved around to that point after the first project got put into the delta, is now coming back to the beach, and we're able to track that. Next slide. So looking at the Downcoast area, so this is everything south of 53rd Avenue. In this point, you're kind of away from the effects of the inlet, but it's still, the sand has been supplied from that. So what we have noticed or observed is after any kind of project, it's a source of sand that's going to kind of work its way down the beach as a package. So what you're doing at the east end is helping the rest of the island, and we're able to track that sand. Over the past year, those Downcoast areas gained 130,000 yards. So what we lost at the east end, a good chunk of that we're seeing on the further south. Since the project, we've gained almost 450,000 yards on the area of the front beach up to 53rd Avenue. Next slide. So if we look at our total volume change, looking at the whole island since 2009, which is the first year we had a full island-wide monitoring, we're over 914,000 cubic yards more sand. So that doesn't include the volume we added in 2008, which was another 900,000. So we're almost 2 million yards of additional sand on the beach if you take it island-wide. I won't get into this graph other than to show we're seeing the sand moving down coast. That's what we can track in those volumes. So over the past 3 years, we've seen it move almost a mile down the beach, and you can look at an aerial image and see a big, wedge of dry sand that's kind of shifting down from the project area. All right, next slide. Front beach area is generally healthy, but it does have kind of the lowest dune volume. Around the Windjammer in those areas is where you have your least amount of setback anywhere along the front beach kind of part of the island avenues. As I mentioned, as these episodic additions of sand, either from a project or from these shoals, kind of work their way down the beach over time, interruptions in that can affect temporary volume changes there, but it does over historically accrete. Unless we have storm events like we had from 2015 to 2020, that kind of shifts everything back a little bit and it takes a long time to recover. Overall, it's pretty healthy from as modest storms, it can be able to absorb that kind of impact. Something like a Hugo, though, not enough protection to avoid damages. Next slide. We're about to wrap up here. We do monitor breach inlet. Breach inlet is just like the other inlet, just a lot smaller scale, very dynamic. Sometimes you can't predict the changes because it's not a sediment supply from up coast, it's changes in the channels and the shoals of the inlet. Over the past year or two, it's done very well building out a dry sand beach. So looking at the same location from 2019 to 2021, a lot of extra dry sand. Similar things, we're tracking how the channels and shoals are moving around there to help kind of predict what's going to happen on the beach. Next slide. This is kind of the last thing, but before I do go that, Dr. Barron has added a section that's very interesting in our reports now that looks at your local sea level rise, your local climatology and wave energy that's been affecting the beach, and kind of trying to look forward of if you're planning on how you're going to be a more resilient community over the next 20 or 30 years, is the kind of information that would be the foundation for that. So if you're having issues with sunny weather flooding and things like that, based off all the latest research and IPCC reports and all that, where are your most vulnerable points going to be, and how should you be incorporating those kind of impacts into your plans over the next 10 years, 20 years, so that you're kind of maximizing your efficiencies and building up your community's resiliency. So if you're doing a drainage project, okay, well, how do we make that where instead of doing it for today, we're doing it for the next 20 years, so we're not having to kind of repeat some of the same things. So I encourage you to kind of look through that section. It's pretty interesting and something I think is valuable for these reports. Moving forward, the beach erosion issue is not going away. It's going to be something that's there long term. The city's done a great job at putting funds away and starting with the, what's the word for that? Breach preservation fund. Yes. So that's been great for the community. The state right now is discussing long-term beach funding for public beaches, which part of your beach is, but the majority of the Wild Dunes area is not. So you can take advantage of some of that funding, especially if anything is needed to be done along the front beach area or breach inlet that is public access beach. So you would be eligible for that state match. There's also resiliency grants that may be available to help drainage projects, beach preservation, or some of these resiliency efforts that Patrick has been keeping up with very well. So that's something that we can talk to Desiree about and hopefully be able to open up some funding for any of these types of projects in the future. Emergency measures, the sandbags, the seawalls, they may be effective in short-term applications, but when you get a year or 2 years of having these emergency measures, they become way more of a headache than they're worth. And there's likely not going to be enough sand to heal those on their own. We need some remediation. So we're thankfully not in any danger of that right now. But depending on how these shoals attach, it may be there in the future. Mentioning the state funding, if that's something the community wants to take advantage of, you really want to have a shovel-ready project. What you don't want to do is get that funding and then start your permit, or know that funding's out there, but then not be even close to starting a permit application, because you may be 2 years of getting the necessary permit review before you're ready to do a project. And by that time, the funding may be out. So I have been encouraging communities that if you do think you may have a project, 4 or 5, even 6 or 7 years from now, starting the permitting process, because permits are good for 5 years. So if you have it in hand, ready to go, should a major storm come by and have a major impact, you're ready to either restore your beach, or if that funding is available, you're ready to take advantage of it. So that's something to kind of consider. We also are talking about potential teaming projects with the Corps of Engineers around Breach Inlet. They're looking to dredge that creek often. They're also looking to remove sand from their spoil islands to open up some of that area. So there is potential for that kind of work and maybe beneficial use of some of that material. So we're talking with them and trying to move forward with making those talks actually to something. So we'll kind of keep you updated on that. Any more questions? Or I think that's all I had. Any questions?
Yeah, Stephen, the groins that are buried on the beach out there, how long have they been there and who placed them there initially? You know?
I do not know who placed them there. DOT had placed a lot in South Carolina in the 30s, 40s, 50s, even up to the 70s.
Right.
That image I showed was from 84. I don't know how long they had been there. I could go back through some
Yeah,
of our
when I
images.
moved here in '84, they were all visible.
We actually saw one that got exposed right before our last project around the Beach Club area, and maybe a little south of there.
Okay, one question. I know you don't have a crystal ball, but based on what you're seeing, when do you think we might need another major replenishment up at the other end of the island? And what can we do to plan for that?
I think you have a shoal that's starting, we call it stage one when it's offshore, but starting to kind of coalesce and start migrating to the beach, and we're there now. It's still probably 2,000 feet from the shoreline, so another 2 to 3 years before it really gets attached to the beach. It's impossible to predict how bad that may be, but that doesn't necessarily mean you need to do a large scale nourishment. You may be able to do another sand transfer project if we can get community support for it. You have one thing that kind of got us is if you're taking sand from the shoal, if it's close enough from the beach, that works out very well. You're just kind of speeding up the process. But they're like the area just south of 53rd Avenue has built out hundreds of feet since 2008 from sand that has come down. If we could kind of recycle some of that sand back, it makes a lot of sense. It's a very cheap way to move sand. But you have to have the support from the people that are behind there because there's potential for some landward shift of their beach over time while that project's occurring. But the large scale project,
So you're not going to give me like a month, date, and year? No.
I was going to give you a time to start pumping, but I mean, I would say 4 to 5 years, but I'm expecting some accelerated erosion in very localized hotspots with this shoal that's attaching in the next 2 or 3 years. It all depends on, sometimes as those shoals attach, they attach very quickly and kind of uniformly and move up the beach. The last one that was occurring in 2018, it seemed to kind of get right at the beach and then just stop. And a lot of the sand didn't move up into the dry sand. It kind of shifted along the low water line along the beach. So we didn't get the recovery around the Beachwood area that we were hoping to get. So it really does depend on that. But I would say having a permit in place sets you up to be able to make that call at a much quicker notice. So if you,
So if we have a 5-year window, now would be a good time to maybe, or soon to start that process? Is that what you're saying?
I would say probably in the next year to start that process. Anything that you would do now would transfer over to 4 or 5 years from now. You wouldn't be duplicating efforts or needing to kind of redo a lot of stuff. But you would have the permit, you'd monitor the beach, and when you said, okay, if it's an episodic erosion event that we think we can kind of weather, then you don't have to implement it. But if it's one that, okay, it's going to drag on and it's causing a lot more problems, then you'd be able to implement the project.
Thank you, Steve.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate you guys' help. And I think, Douglas, that report, I think is online, if I remember right. The report you're holding, Stephen, is, yeah,
We'll be sure it is.
yeah.
I think, pretty sure it already
I
is.
think it is too. We'll double check. Thank you, guys. Next are citizens' comments. Just a reminder, with these are limited to 3 minutes. Nicole, you think you had a number of folks and you got the order of speaking.
Yes, sir. Former Councilman Bell is up first.
I promise not to be 3 minutes.
I've been looking for this day right here, Randy Bell.
You know, and I swore there wouldn't be this day. I started on this side, wound up over there, back over here. No, look, And by the way, you need to address and all that stuff,
Yep.
Nicole.
Mhm.
Randy Bell, 22 41st Avenue.